Okay, brilliant. So then just a little bit of housekeeping before we kick off. I'm Katie, I'm Programme Manager here at Elect Here and work with candidates, and then also once women are elected, we have support in place there. This is a multi-party space. We're asking everyone to be respectful and mindful that we come here with different viewpoints, supporting different policies. Politics is about representing and working with people with different views. So we ask you to practice that here in this space. That doesn't mean not to disclose which party you're from. That's totally fine. We can talk about our parties, but just respectfully. If you feel able to, we'd love having your face on the screen, put your camera on so we can feel that we're a room of women together supporting each other and everyone can join in. If you're doing bedtime with kids and the only way you can join in is by listening, that's also totally welcome. We're really glad to have you here too. Use the chat to comment on what gets said. You can also raise your hand. Patricia will indicate kind of how she wants people to participate. When you're not speaking, if you could mute, this means that the audio is clearer for everyone and makes it much easier for people with hearing difficulties or additional needs. Everything that's said in the room in terms of people sharing their own experience is confidential, so we ask please don't share what someone else is sharing beyond this space. And I said that this call is being recorded, but primarily so we can share some of the content Patricia's doing with a wider group. On this call in a second, I'm going to give you a moment to introduce yourselves in the chat. Could you please say your name, whereabouts you're standing for election, and the type of role you're going for? And it would be lovely for us if you could pop in whether you have been selected or are still going through selection. I'm going to hand it over to the fantastic Patricia in a second. Patricia has been working with us for many years in many different guises and has many areas of expertise. But Patricia is a coach and public speaking expert, and so she's here to share tips and tricks, advice and training around public speaking. Particularly thinking about going through selection, but totally transferable to the other forms of public speaking you do. So without further ado, I'll hand over to the fantastic Patricia, and we're so pleased to have you here tonight.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Katie. Yes, indeed, lovely to be here tonight. I'm starting to see things come through on the chat. Let me start by sharing my screen with you, and we'll just set a bit of context for what we are going to be doing here across the next hour or so. Yeah, I guess the essence of it is part of these candidate clinics, these particular ones, thinking about the aspects of speaking and influence that are, of course, very key to your success as a candidate. And really, in a way, because when you're speaking, it is like your shop front. It is how people will judge you. Now, I know in many respects that's perhaps not very fair, that because when they see you doing a short speech, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, that is not all of you. It is a small part of you, and speaking skills are a small subset of the overall value that you bring. However, recognise that when people see you in public meetings or in selection meetings or whatever, they don't know the whole of you, and so they're going to judge the book by its cover. Unfortunately, it is human nature. So actually, this ability to speak well is really fundamental to your role as a politician. So in the spirit of helping you prepare for all of that, that's what this series of clinics is about. The idea is just to help you feel more comfortable and confident in any of these speaking assignments, given the nature of their importance. I want you to come away with this as well, aware perhaps of some of the pitfalls. What are they? Particularly the pitfalls for women. and to think about what are the techniques and some of the ideas to help. I don't always like the phrase tips and tricks, because I don't think there's any tricks here. I think it's really just technique and skills. I'm also going to give you an opportunity to practice. So that's kind of the way it's going to go. Today, and these 4 clinics, by the way, have been designed to be standalone. So if you're unable to make any of the other ones, it's not a deal breaker. It's not a problem. Katie will be recording the relevant bits, so if you do miss any of these future ones, you can always check back in and grab them. So today we're going to focus very much on this sort of short form selection speech. So as I can see in the chat, some of you are already selected, and some of you are going for re-election, some of you are candidates. So we're calling this the selection speech, but it equally could be a hustings speech, or any sort of short, sharp speech that you've got to do. Then in future months, and in fact, booking into, I can hardly believe it, but booking into 2026, we'll also be doing a session on handling Q&A and handling aggression, bias, conscious or otherwise, and what you do with that specifically. However, today, yes, we're going to focus on selection speeches. So I wanted to start just by setting a little bit of context. And then what I'll do is outline some of these ideas. Then I'm going to encourage you to put together a short speech, whether it's a selection speech or a hustings speech or any other short form speech, ideally ones that you've actually got coming up. So the more you can be working on something that is real, the more value you'll get out of it. And again, get you to work on it and then share it in small groups with each other so you can road test it, as it were. So start point is, yes, I guess we probably all know this through bitter experience, that the route to electoral success is not equal. There are a lot of things that make it much harder for women, and that's one of the reasons that Elect Her exists, is to try and level that playing field a little. And when I think about this specifically in the context of women speaking in politics, it strikes me that there's a fundamental tension here, a fundamental challenge. That a lot of the time when you think about how women are socialized, and you think about a lot of that socialization is subconsciously absorbed. We might not think we do this, but a lot of the time it's probably been baked into us since childhood. But yeah, that some of the socialization we receive as to what it is to be a good woman, often tied up with ideas of people pleasing, of being perfect. It's all right. Boys are made of slugs and snails and puppy dogs' tails, but girls are sugar and spice and all things nice. And of course, boys will be boys, but girls have got to be perfect. If you've I don't know if anybody's ever watched that great TED talk called Brave Not Perfect. Anybody's no, if you've not seen that, I'll pop it in the chat later. It's well worth 12 minutes of your life to watch. But it talks about how so many women and girls have been socialized to feel like they need to be perfect to be okay. And that, of course, makes things quite hard when it comes to speaking, because you tend to feel like, if you don't get it 100% correct, or you get something wrong, or you're not quite as smooth as you would like to be, that's something terribly wrong. And often perfection is the enemy of good enough. And sometimes perfection is the enemy of progress. So that socialization around some perfection drivers is not helpful. Some of the other socializations around women being encouraged to be the collegiate ones, the team players, the peacemakers, the ones who are going to smooth it all down and make it all right. And sometimes also that a good woman is a quiet woman, and that a woman who expresses her opinion forcefully is bossy or strident or shrill or shrieky or any of those other double standards that I'm imagining many of you have come across in your careers to date. I don't know. Give me there you go. Let's make use of some of those reactions. Has anybody ever been told that they are shrill or shrieky or loud or bossy? Give me a thumbs up if you have, or a wave or a something or other. Yeah, there we go. Oh yeah, gosh, I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up all of a sudden. Yeah, unfortunately, it is a fairly universal experience of any woman I've ever spoken to, and I've spoken to quite a lot. So if we take all of that socialization as one thing, and then we look at the nature of politics, right? If women are supposed to be perfect and they're supposed to be quiet and they're supposed to be the peacemakers, how is that expected to work in politics, which by its very nature is adversarial? The whole of our politics, certainly in the Western world, is set up as an adversarial system. You've got a government, you've got a leader of the opposition, all based on some ideas of Greek philosophy around thesis, antithesis. If you've ever been in the Houses of Commons and stood on the opposite sides of the dispatch box, there's a red line in the carpet. You ever seen that? The red line indicates 2 sword distances apart, so that in the old days the opposition couldn't kill each other. But it's all built on this very sort of conflictual, critical, adversarial type of culture, really. And that almost fundamentally makes life difficult in politics for women. It makes it difficult for the way we feel about things. And it makes it difficult often for how we're perceived. Great. Thank you, Katie, for putting that link to Brave Not Perfect in. So, that's kind of the context, and it does make it's one of those things that, going back to the the non-level playing field, this socialization is something that doesn't help us. However, what we're going to do is, again, help you break it down a little bit and think about your short form speech, your selection speech, and think about how you deal perhaps with some of those issues. And some of that we'll deal with today, and some we'll deal with certainly, for example, in that last session when we talk about bias and criticism. So, short selection speeches. So put in the chat for me, if you would, for those of you who already have been selected, or perhaps for those of you knowing what it's going to be coming up. Typically, how long is your selection speech? I hear different things from different parties. Sometimes it's 3 minutes, sometimes it's 5 minutes. Don't think I've heard much longer than 10 minutes ever. Yeah, 3 minutes. 3 minutes, 3 minutes. Yeah. 2 minutes. Wow. Okay. That's and that's tough. Right, I guess we could do it. I guess if you do that, you then probably have much longer for Q&A, which is why we've got one of these sessions dedicated. It'll be session 3, dedicated to handling Q&A. But yeah, that is a really tough gig. One of the things I do for my sins, because I like having no spare time whatsoever, is I run a TEDx event in the town I live in. And, what I'm getting TEDx speakers to do is to try and express a concept and a powerful idea in 12 minutes. For you to get over the essence of who you are and all you have to offer in 3 minutes really is the ultimate challenge. It's very, very difficult. So let's think about some of the principles that we should be thinking about. Yes, it needs to be short, needs to be punchy. What does it need to achieve? It needs to give people very, very quickly a sense of you. Who are you? And critically, what can you do for them? I guess one of the things we know about human nature is that we're all self-interested. We like to think we're very altruistic, but in fact, we're actually programmed to, as a matter of survival, to be quite self-interested. So, really think about when you're giving a speech at a hustings, or you're giving a speech where people are choosing to select you or vote for you, the most important thing is, what is it you're going to do for them? Now, you've probably all seen this type of graph before. The split of how impact is delivered in verbal communication. So the infinitely depressing part of this equation is this idea that it is absolutely true, but it is quite depressing. Is this idea that actually the words that we use probably only make up about 10% of the impact of what we say. Which is depressing, because when we think about how much care and consideration we put into the content of what we're going to say, the actual delivery of it in terms of our voice and in terms of our body language, absolutely crucial. More important, in fact. I hate to use this word in current context. Sorry, the Trump thing, but delivery trumps content, right? People are going to make a decision about you and how they feel about you. And that's going to be visceral, and it's going to be about what you do with your voice and body, more than what you actually say. So, first thing to think about is that in these typically 3 to 5 minute talks, number one is the principle of less is more. Don't try and get too much in, because if you do, what happens? You end up just talking very, very quickly and trying to get through a whole load of content, and it's you scroll through loads and loads of stuff, and you feel under pressure, which doesn't help your delivery, and you speak really quickly, which doesn't help anybody absorb things. And although you're talking the words, they're not landing. So better to have less, but land it better, than it is to try and overpack any given speech. So yes, always bear that in mind, that less is more, and the delivery, what you do with your voice, what you do with your body language, is critically important. Quick question here: does everybody, when you're doing these things like hustings and selections, are they mostly in person, or are still some quite a lot online? You want to just pop that in the chat if it's what you do the majority of this. Okay. So if that is saying online, some people in person, yeah. I suppose, again, because this is the thing about interpersonal reaction, in person does make some sense. If you're doing it online, of course, it's even harder, because what you've got is this much body language, and you're losing, the vast majority of body language. And if that is the case, by the way, you have to work your voice, really work your voice much, much harder. You have to become like a television presenter, and your voice has to have a modulation that will probably feel really exaggerated and over the top, but will probably land well. So yeah, if it's online, your voice becomes critically important. So one of the other challenges women have is, you may have come across this idea of women and likability. It's a form of unconscious bias. Paulie, I see you nodding your head. Have you come across that before? Yeah. It's this idea that if, as a woman, you can be liked but not respected, if you're going to be respected, you probably won't be liked. And, it's an incredibly difficult thing for women to get past. And it's partly because our paradigms of leadership are usually modelled on males, because that's what they've been historically. And so if women display leadership characteristics like strength and tenacity, and toughness and these sort of things, they might make you respected, but because they're not standard female behaviors, or not historically expected female behaviors, they perhaps don't make you liked. So trying to strike that balance is really tough for women. And of course, we all have come across these double standards. You know, somebody with leadership skills in a man is called bossy when a woman does the same thing. An assertive man is an aggressive woman, and so forth. So some of these are the things that we have to be aware of and deal with proactively. And one of the things I always think is interesting here, when you're presenting yourself, you're of course having to say a lot about yourself. Like we said, one of the key things about a selection interview or a hustings speech is like you're there to tell people a little bit about yourself. But that actually can land you slap bang in the middle of the likability thing. If you very firmly and clearly state all your qualifications and, you know, your experience, and you go through a long list of perhaps impressive jobs and roles and community activism and all of this that you've done, unfortunately for women, that can cause people to go, oh, she's a bit full of herself, isn't she? So you've kind of got to think carefully about how you position that. The other big one that people fall into is this trap about when you do talk about your achievements, do you say I or do you say we? And what I interviewed for the book I wrote on this sort of women and speaking topic, I interviewed a lady who used to be the senior manager for all of PepsiCo in Eastern Europe. And she told me this story about a time when she was up for a global PepsiCo award, and she had to go to the States to present to the chief exec of PepsiCo, her and two men, that to present their achievements, and then the CEO would decide. Well, she was given a coach to help her with this presentation, and the coach said to her, well, you know, you're talking about all these achievements and you're talking about we. You know, this is about you. So you need to talk about you and your achievements. It's not, you know, we don't want to know what anybody else did. We want to know what you did. So talk about I. And she said, well, wasn't really very comfortable doing that. Not my normal style. But they've paid for this coach for me, so I suppose I better listen to him. So she went into the presentation, talked about I. Outcome, didn't win the prize, got the feedback that they didn't like the way she didn't credit her team. And that to me, when she told me that story, I suddenly started hearing it from lots of other people, because that advice that male coach gave her would have been good for a man. But because the expectations of women are that we're collegiate and we're team players and we're all of this, it kind of clashed with what expectations were. So again, walking this fine line between saying what you've achieved, but also giving credit to your fellow candidates, your fellow, your local party associations and groups. It's a fine line. You need to make it clear what you specifically did, whilst also giving credit to others.